As tensions between India and Canada have sharply escalated over the last 2 weeks, India has now told Canada in no uncertain terms to withdraw 41 of its diplomats from its High Commission in New Delhi and consulates across the country. The deadline is for the 10th of October. This comes after Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau publicly accused India of orchestrating the killing of Khalistani terrorist and Canadian citizen Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Justin Trudeau had said that Canada is not looking to escalate the situation with India and it will continue to engage responsibly and constructively with New Delhi. Trudeau has said Canada wants to be on the ground in India to help the Canadian families there. India, remember, immediately dismissed the allegations that Trudeau had levelled as absurd and motivated. The allegation, which is yet to be supported by any tangible evidence, has kicked up a major diplomatic row between the two countries, with Ottawa and New Delhi initially expelling each other's senior diplomats. This was followed by India suspending its visa services in Canada and asking Ottawa to downsize its missions in the country. Canada currently has 62 diplomats stationed in India, and New Delhi's demand for a reduction of Canadian diplomatic strength by 41 makes it clear that it seeks parity in the strength and rank equivalence of diplomatic personnel in each other's countries. This imbalance has been a point of contention throughout this diplomatic crisis. Peter Boehm, chair of the Canadian Senate Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Trade, has said, and I quote, "Declaring more Canadian diplomats persona non grata wouldn't help the situation and would make reducing the emotions associated with this disagreement more difficult." On its part, it seems Canada is unwilling to back down from its allegations. Peter Boehm has also said India views Canada as an easy mark due to its limited capacity to retaliate given its minority government. He said, and I quote, "India knows our capacity to retaliate is limited. They know we have a minority government and it's aware of the consequent politics at play. And of course, India has an election on the horizon." Prime Minister Justin Trudeau shares power with Indian origin and Canadian Sikh leader Jagmeet Singh, who is a well-known Khalistani sympathizer. Meanwhile, US State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller has once again reiterated that the US has engaged with the Indian government at the highest levels and urged it to cooperate with Canada's investigation. In fact, Miller also said the US Secretary of State had an opportunity to discuss this issue in his meeting with India's foreign minister last week. Antony Blinken did in fact raise this issue during his meeting with India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar in Washington, D.C. last week, emphasizing the importance of collaboration on this issue between India and Canada. While India maintains that the allegations are baseless, Jaishankar has emphasized that if Canada shares specific and relevant information, India is open to examining it. As we said, no credible evidence has been forthcoming so far, and it remains unclear what kind of an off-ramp Justin Trudeau may be looking for, if at all, to de-escalate tensions between the two sides. What is clear, though, is that the diplomatic downsizing will further hurt not only the already fraught India-Canada ties, but also Canada's education sector, given that 40% of the foreign students in Canada are from India. This is a significant number of Canadian diplomats that we are talking about. All right, let's go across to my colleague Shri, who joins us as always from Washington, D.C. With his perspective on all the top stories on Global Lens. Shri, great to have you back on the show. This is something that India had threatened Canada with a few days ago, asking the country to downsize its diplomatic presence here. Now, a deadline has been set. Ottawa has been asked to reduce its diplomatic strength by as much as 41 out of a total of 62 diplomats who are currently present on Indian soil. That's a huge number that we are talking about. How do you think this is likely to impact not just India-Canada ties, but like I said, Canada's education sector, because a huge number of students from India go to that country every year. It goes without saying that they earn a lot of revenue from Indian students. And a significantly reduced diplomatic presence in India would certainly mean that it will be that much more challenging for Canada to even, for example, process visas.
No, absolutely not, Neha, because there are at last count, an estimated 320,000 Indian students in Canada. That's 3.2 lakh Indian students in Canada. Now, apart from the fact that these students are going to go on to become, potentially productive part of Canada's economy, therefore creating wealth for the Canadian economy, the immediate challenge for Canada is that what happens if this supply of students stops? The universities are obviously going to suffer. So now, with India asking Canada to, repatriate 41 of its diplomats in Delhi, in India, I think there's a real danger of this relationship spiraling beyond a point where it can be repaired, Neha. Because don't forget that in the past we have had instance. We have had a long history actually with Canada where the relationship has been very, very cold. So we had our own Cold War with Canada for several years, largely because of India's nuclear program development. Disagreement was around that. So I think there's a real threat that this may reach a point where we cross the Rubicon and there's no going back. I don't think we should allow it to come to that point. I think there's a need for someone to step in, someone like the US to step in and do two things. One, it has been asking India to look at the allegation that Canada has made, and India has offered that if there's a credible evidence you submit to us, we will definitely look into it. In fact, Jaishankar said, why won't we look into it? I mean, we'd be mad not to look into it, as was his implication. So while US has been pressurizing India to cooperate with Canada, I think it's incumbent on the US also to put pressure on Canada to look at least the 2021 names that India has given to Canada, saying that these are people, specific people, Sikh separatists, Khalistani separatists who are causing problem of not just an attack on India's sovereignty, but also other activities like money laundering, supply of arms and ammunition, drug trades, and illegal human trafficking, all kinds of things that these people are involved in, Neha. So I think it is incumbent on Canada also, if the Prime Minister is serious about what he's saying, which is that he has no intention of escalating this row with India, then I think he has to make a move which shows that Canada is serious about it and is willing to, walk the extra mile to de-escalate the situation. So I think what Canada could do is, look at India's reports, which have been piling up for the last 40 years, dust them off, and say, okay, we are going to institute an independent committee which is going to look at all the allegations or all the reports that India has submitted. And if any of these people if there's evidence that they have indulged in terrorism, then we will not care that these are Canadian citizens, but we will act against them, if need be, even extradite them to India. So some sort of a gesture has to come because India very clearly is not in a mood to back off, Neha. I mean, this is an escalation clearly from India's side, largely because India feels that it's morally right. It's morally in the correct position right now to make this kind of a demand. Because let us not forget, I mean, the farmers' protest, it was a simple change in basic law which would have helped the farmers. Now, there was no need for Canada or even Prime Minister Trudeau to step in and talk about India's agri reforms and the laws that we are trying to bring in. It was completely, I think, uncalled for. So I think Canada needs to recognize that while it cares about its voter base, about the Khalistani voter base that Trudeau's government depends on, there's only so much pandering that it will allow or it should do, and then work on creating a long-lasting relationship with India, because it's not just about the students, it's not just about the exchange of goods, the trade between the two countries, but also from a geopolitical context. Both Canada and India have one country to worry about, which is China. We have a lot of evidence. Canada itself has a lot of evidence. That's been a big issue in Canada, that China has interfered in Canada's own elections. And Prime Minister Trudeau, unfortunately, has not done anything. It was with great, pressure from the opposition leaders and public opinion that finally an independent judge was, appointed to look into the allegations. So something similar needs to happen in the case of the evidence which India has submitted in the case of the Khalistani terrorist, Neha. And I think that would be a fair point from which India would start de-escalating and then going back to some sort of a position where a sensible, rational conversation can be had on this issue.
Well, you're quite right that, this is a very important escalatory measure that India has taken, and perhaps some sort of conciliatory gesture needs to come from Canada. On the face of it, Shri, it would seem like Justin Trudeau is digging his heels in, but there are some who believe that he may have painted himself into a corner with his shoot and scoot diplomacy. So the question I want to ask you is, while India has its own set of demands, including that Canada look into the various dossiers that have been submitted on Khalistani activities taking place on Canadian soil, do you believe from his point of view, Justin Trudeau may be looking for some sort of an off-ramp to de-escalate matters? And if at all that is true, what might that be?
No, so I think the onus is clearly on Canada, Neha, because one, they have not submitted any evidence which India says is credible evidence, right? So that's the first thing. I mean, saying that we have credible allegations, and based on that, we have decided to create this, a row between India and Canada. I mean, that I think, first of all, boggles my mind, because how can that happen? Because these are things that are done using the back channel where, diplomats talk to each other and say, okay, this is what we have, what do you have to say? And it's usually sorted out. So if he has chosen to bring this to the public fora based on very scant evidence, based purely on evidence that, they have, electronic evidence they have from the Five Eyes intelligence community, then I think Canada needs to ask itself whether that was the right thing to have done. Now, what can, Justin Trudeau do to basically de-escalate, and is basically to walk the talk. If he's serious about a deeper engagement with India and not spoiling the relationship with India, then there has to be some solid move that comes from Justin Trudeau, which says that yes, we are cognizant of the problem that India is facing because of a handful of people, not because of the Sikh community at all, but because of a handful of Khalistani people whose sources of funding, whose motivation are very different from the larger Sikh community. Because we know that Sikh community in India is very peaceful, most industrious, they are the most affable and friendly people. There's absolutely no reason for us to be upset with the Sikh community at large. It's only a handful of people that we have an issue with. Now, the crux of the problem, Neha, what it boils down to is this. Even if you look at the US's response on this issue has been rather tepid. It's pushing India to look at the allegation that Canada is making, but it itself has been a little tolerant of, the Khalistani movement, even in the US. There are people, even in the US, who are based here and conspiring against India on the Khalistani issue. So the reason is very simple, Neha, because unlike the ISIS or the Islamic terrorism issue, Sikh or the Khalistani separatism is not hurting Western countries. Okay, but I remember back in the late 80s, there was a CIA report which looked at the Khalistan issue and said that this could someday become a potential problem for Western countries as well. And now, in the case of Canada, this clearly is a present problem. There are Khalistani gang members who, are running gangs, who are dealing in drugs, who are dealing in arms and ammunitions. They are killing people for money. They're doing human trafficking. They're operating out of Canadian boundaries also, in terms of procuring drugs from, Far East, and also from the Afghanistan-Pakistan, corridor. So there is a threat which Canada is already facing. All it needs for Canada is to say that, yes, we have problem. We need to rise above our vote bank politics and look at this issue. And if there is any evidence which is coming either from, India or even US, because Neha, don't forget, US keeps tabs on everyone. So I would, I'd be very surprised if US didn't have evidence of what really these people are doing. So I don't buy that for a minute. US has a lot of intelligence. So I think Canada needs to look at that and rise above this petty politics and say, yes, we are going to do something which gives comfort to India and also addresses an issue which, is certainly going to threaten the Canadian society, if not today, tomorrow.
You're quite right, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Shri, that the West seems to only be concerned about Islamist terrorism, but not about Khalistani extremism, because it doesn't hurt them personally. That's where, unfortunately, the duplicity lies.